fog was already rising when Mara Ellison pressed record. Her voice trembled, but she spoke anyway, quietly, as though the air itself might shatter. If anyone finds this, I made it to the edge. The Vergewood stood before her, a vast cathedral of green silence, so still it seemed to be listening. Legend said people entered and came back years later, unchanged, confused, untouched by time. She felt the pull of it now, an invisible hum, low and resonant, as if the forest breathed beneath her feet. Jonas Reed lingered a few paces behind, his boots sinking into damp moss. "We shouldn't linger," he muttered, but his tone betrayed curiosity. Mara looked over her shoulder once more. The fog had erased the trailhead. The world behind her no longer existed. Only the forest remained. When she stepped across the threshold, the air thickened. A faint whisper brushed her ear. Not words, not wind, but something older than both. The first sound inside the Vergewood was not bird song, but a hum, so deep it seemed to live inside the bones. Mara paused, listening. It wasn't constant, but rhythmic, like breathing beneath the soil. "Jonas?" she said softly. "Do you hear that?" He nodded once, jaw clenched. The trees here were impossibly tall, their roots twisting through old stone like veins. A pale light drifted in thin ribbons through the mist, illuminating particles that hung motionless in the air, as though time itself had slowed. Every step forward seemed to take longer than it should, the world stretching like a held note. Mara looked down at her watch. The second hand had stopped. She frowned, tapping the glass, but it didn't move. Jonas lifted his wrist. His watch had frozen too. They looked at each other, the silence pressing close. Somewhere ahead, a voice whispered something neither of them could understand. They followed the sound deeper, guided by something like instinct. The forest floor was thick with moss, soft enough to erase their footprints. Every few steps, Mara stopped to film, but the footage shimmered strangely, colors bleeding, depth bending. Jonas trailed her with unease, tightening his shoulders. He'd been in these woods before, long ago, searching for people who never came back. The air now felt heavier, older, as though the forest remembered him. "It's like walking through a dream," Mara murmured. But Jonas didn't answer. He was staring at a tree ahead, its trunk carved with names so faded they seemed centuries old. One of them, just barely legible, made his breath catch. It, his own. The forest grew stranger with each step. Light fractured into shards, scattering like broken glass whenever they moved. Mara began hearing echoes that didn't belong to their voices, snatches of conversation she couldn't recall saying. Her camera picked up shadows walking behind them, just out of frame. Jonas' radio crackled once with static, then fell silent. "I think it's the air," he said, forcing a calm tone. "The humidity messes with signals," but his eyes betrayed him. He was remembering something, a rescue, years ago, or maybe minutes, when another team went in and only he returned. Mara turned her lens toward him. "You've been here before," she said. He didn't deny it. Instead, he whispered, "Not here, but close." By midday, they reached a clearing where the fog thinned to silver light. The trees circled the space like sentinels, their trunks blackened with age. At the center stood an old stone arch, broken and overgrown. Moss dripped from its crown like green rain. Mara lowered her camera, breath catching. "What is this?" Jonas stepped forward slowly, boots sinking into the damp soil. "It's where they disappeared," he said. His hand brushed one of the stones. Cold, too cold. The hum returned, low and powerful now, vibrating through the ground. The air shimmered. For a moment, the clearing bent inward, as though space itself was breathing. Mara raised the camera again, her reflection flickering in the lens. But behind her reflection, another version of herself stared back. Night fell too quickly. One moment the clearing was drenched in dim gold. The next, darkness pooled between the trees as if the sun had been swallowed. Mara switched on her lantern, the beam slicing through mist, thick as smoke. "We can't be far from the old campsite," Jonas said, though his voice carried no conviction. They walked in silence, their footsteps muffled by moss. The forest was noiseless, not even the drone of insects. Only that deep hum lingered, steady as a heartbeat beneath the ground. When they found the remnants of a fire pit, ashes scattered like pale snow, Jonas knelt to touch them. They were warm. "Someone's here," he whispered. Mara turned her camera slowly toward the darkness beyond the trees. For a split second, she saw a figure watching them, motionless, blurred by fog. When she blinked, it was gone. They made camp beneath the leaning arms of an ancient cedar. The air carried a metallic scent, sharp and cold. Jonas gathered twigs that crumbled into powder the moment he touched them. Mara recorded everything: the hiss of her breath, the tremor of her hand, the strange hush pressing on her eardrums. When she replayed a clip, her heart froze. Their voices were missing. The video showed them sitting by the lantern's light, mouths moving soundlessly. Behind them, the trees swayed as though stirred by invisible currents. "It's corrupt," Jonas said, reaching for the device, but Mara pulled it away. "No, it's not the camera." Her voice was small now. "It's us." The forest seemed to lean closer, listening. Sometime in the night, Mara awoke to whispering. It wasn't near. It was inside her head. As if the forest were speaking through her dreams. The voice repeated fragments. "Return the hours. Return the hours." She sat up, heart hammering. Across the camp, Jonas was gone. His bedroll lay empty. A dark imprint in the dew. The lantern was still burning, its flame frozen in place, unmoving. Even the smoke hung still. "Jonas?" Her voice fell flat, swallowed by silence. She followed faint footprints that glowed faintly against the ground, leading deeper between the trees. The hum was stronger now, thrumming through her bones. It felt like walking into the pulse of the earth itself. She found Jonas standing before a cluster of stones, his body stiff, eyes fixed on something she couldn't yet see. "Jonas," she whispered, but he didn't move. As she approached, the air grew heavy, each breath thick as syrup. Then she saw what held him still, a group of figures standing in the clearing ahead, translucent, faintly luminous, their outlines flickering like old film. Some were dressed in hiking gear from decades past. They were the missing. Jonas lifted a trembling hand toward them, his voice breaking. "I know you." One of the shapes turned, a woman with his same badge on her jacket, and smiled sadly before fading. The hum built to a roar, and the forest itself seemed to twist. Mara screamed his name, but Jonas didn't turn. When the light finally faded, the clearing was empty. Jonas lay on the ground, pale and gasping, eyes glassy, as if seeing another world superimposed over this one. "They called to me," he murmured. Mara knelt beside him, gripping his shoulders. "Who?" He swallowed hard, shaking his head. "My old team. They said, it's not years the forest takes. It's the moments you forget." She stared at him, uncomprehending. His skin felt cold, as though something had drained the warmth from him. The trees rustled then, though no wind stirred. Overhead the stars flickered, briefly, impossibly, before rearranging into constellations she didn't recognize. Mara looked up in horror. Time itself was shifting. By morning, the air felt wrong. The fog had lifted, but the light was unfamiliar. Thinner, more brittle, as though the world were a photograph fading at its edges. Mara checked her watch again. The hands had vanished entirely. Jonas moved slowly, his steps unsteady, eyes distant. "It feels like we've been walking forever," he murmured, but his breath came out in small white clouds, and the trees were different now, wider, older, scarred by lightning strikes that hadn't existed the night before. The forest floor shimmered faintly beneath their boots, as if coated in dew that glowed from within. Mara switched on her camera, but the timestamp glitched, jumping decades ahead with every blink. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Jonas, what year is it?" He looked up at the sky, pale light flickering through branches that seemed to pulse. "Not ours." They stumbled upon the remnants of a campsite half buried in moss, a rusted kettle, a torn jacket, a camera identical to Mara's, half fused with the soil. She crouched beside it, brushing away dirt until a logo emerged, her own initials carved into the casing. "That's impossible," she whispered. Jonas said nothing. He was staring at the trees again, where faint shapes hung between trunks like reflections in glass. One of them moved when she did. She lifted her lens toward it and froze. The figure staring back was her. Older, the same jacket, the same eyes, but heavier somehow, as though carrying years the forest had swallowed. The figure lifted its hand in warning, lips moving soundlessly. Mara dropped the camera. It landed in the moss with a hollow click that echoed far too long. The echo of that sound didn't fade. It multiplied. Dozens of hollow clicks rippled through the forest, bouncing from unseen corners, forming a rhythm that grew louder with every second. Mara clutched her ears. Jonas shouted something she couldn't hear. Then, silence. Total. When she opened her eyes, the forest had changed again. The mist was gone, replaced by a golden light that felt like afternoon. Leaves had fallen, carpeting the ground in amber and red. It was autumn now. Jonas turned in a slow circle, his voice barely a whisper. How long were we standing there? She couldn't answer. The forest pulsed faintly, a steady beat beneath her feet. She realized then it wasn't just bending time. It was feeding on it. They followed a stream that hadn't been there before, its water glinting gold, as if reflecting another sun. Mara recorded everything, but the playback showed scenes from different seasons, snow where there was none, shadows of trees that hadn't yet grown. Jonas' exhaustion deepened with every step. His body seemed to resist the air itself. "We're being stretched," he said through clenched teeth. She didn't understand until she saw her own reflection in the water, her hair streaked with gray that hadn't been there hours ago. "Jonas, look!" He did, and his eyes filled with quiet dread. The forest wasn't stealing their years all at once. It was taking them grain by grain, moment by moment, each second consumed before it could be lived. They reached the ridge as twilight gathered, the forest sprawling below like a dark ocean. In the distance, faint lights flickered, a town maybe, or the remnants of one. Mara's chest filled with fragile hope. "If we can just reach it," she said, voice trembling, "we can find out how much time we've lost." But Jonas didn't move. His gaze was fixed on the valley, where strange pillars of light rose and fell, slow as breathing. "That's no town," he murmured. "That's us." Before she could speak, she saw it too. Tiny figures moving in loops at the forest's edge, repeating the same steps again and again. Their own movements mirrored from hours before. The Vergewood wasn't a place you escaped. It was a place that remembered you forever. When night came again, it arrived without warning. One heartbeat of twilight, then complete dark. Mara fumbled for her lantern, but its glow sputtered like a dying pulse. Jonas struck a match, its flame trembling against his face. "Something's following us," he whispered. She didn't ask how he knew. She could feel it too, a pressure at her back, like the forest itself had grown eyes. Every tree leaned closer. The hum beneath the ground returned, no longer gentle. It throbbed, heavy and slow, resonating in chest. Then came a rustling, not from wind but movement. Something vast and slow shifting beneath the earth. "Run," Jonas said, voice barely sound. They bolted through the dark roots, rising like grasping fingers, the ground itself trying to hold them. When they stopped, gasping, the lantern light revealed deep gouges in the soil, spiraling outward like veins. They found refuge inside a hollow tree large enough to stand in. Its walls were slick with sap that pulsed faintly, golden and warm. Jonas leaned against it, trembling. "It's alive," he muttered. "It's not just growing, it's listening." Mara touched the surface. The sap brightened under her palm, revealing faint shapes within. Faces pressed into the bark, mouths open in silent cries. She stumbled back, heart hammering. "These are the ones who never came out," she whispered. Jonas shook his head, eyes wet. "No. These are the ones who did, just not all the way." The forest groaned, a sound like distant thunder rolling beneath the ground. The walls of the hollow flexed, tightening around them. They tore free from the hollow and stumbled into a clearing suffused with green luminescence. At its center stood a circle of trees unlike any other, smooth, pale, and perfectly symmetrical, their branches braided together to form a single crown. The air shimmered there, a slow spiral of dust and light. Jonas fell to his knees, whispering, "This is the heart." Mara lifted her camera, but the moment the lens pointed at the circle, the screen went black. Her reflection stared back at her, blinking independently, whispering words she couldn't hear. "It's feeding," she said softly. Jonas' voice broke. "Then what does it eat?" She looked toward the spiraling light, her face illuminated by its pulse. "Time," she answered. "Hours." The ground beneath them shifted, breathing again. Slow, rhythmic, like a sleeping beast. From between the roots, something rose. A network of tendrils, pulsing with faint light, winding upward toward the trees. Each thread shimmered with visions, memories stolen from other lives. A child's laughter, a woman's cry, a flash of a road from another time. The forest was not only alive, it was remembering everything it had consumed. Mara stepped closer, tears streaking her face. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Jonas grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "That's how it takes you," he warned, but she could already feel it. Time brushing against her skin, warm and seductive. The roots trembled, reaching higher, drawn to her heartbeat. The forest erupted in motion. The braided trees split apart, their crowns unraveling as the hum became a roar. Jonas pulled Mara backward, shouting over the sound, but she could barely hear him. Every heartbeat seemed stretched, each second an eternity. Light poured from the center of the clearing, swallowing shadow, turning the world into blinding white. She saw everything at once, her past, her future, every version of herself trapped inside the forest's pulse. For a moment, she understood it. The Vergewood wasn't cruel. It was endless, caught in a loop of hunger and memory. Then the light folded inward, silent again. When Mara opened her eyes, Jonas was gone. Only the circle remained, pulsing slowly like a heart. Silence. Only her breathing filled the clearing. The brilliant light was gone, leaving a dim gray pallor that clung to the trees like ash. Mara called Jonas' name, but the sound barely reached beyond her lips. The forest had gone still again, too still. She replayed her camera's last footage. It showed nothing but white glare, and then, impossibly, Jonas' voice saying her name from somewhere distant. The timestamp read, October 12th, 2046. Her pulse spiked. That was 21 years ahead. She stumbled backward, shaking her head, whispering, "No, no, no." The forest didn't answer. The hum had returned, faint now, satisfied. She looked around the clearing. Every breath tasting metallic like static in the air. Jonas was gone, but his footprints remained, each one sinking slightly deeper, as though time itself were pressing them into the earth. Hours or days passed before she moved again. Hunger gnawed at her, but the forest offered no sound, no scent, no life at all. Only time. She followed Jonas' trail, the air thick and warm. At intervals, she found pieces of him, his knife embedded in a tree trunk, his jacket half buried under moss that hadn't been there minutes ago. She began to hear him calling her name, not from ahead, but from behind. Mara? The voice was near, familiar. But when she turned, the forest was empty. Still, the voice persisted, growing weaker with every echo. "Don't stop walking," it whispered once, so softly she almost missed it. "Don't let it remember you." She quickened her pace, heart pounding, afraid of what would happen if she did stop. By dusk, the forest began to change again. The trees were taller now, the moss silver instead of green, the sky a flat sheet of violet. Mara stopped to rest, pressing her palm to her chest as her heartbeat slowed strangely. It wasn't fatigue. It was as if her body had fallen out of sync with itself. She lifted the camera again, her reflection ghostly in the lens. Behind her, the shapes moved, figures walking backward through the fog. She realized with sick horror that they were her and Jonas, moments from the past, looping endlessly. "It's making copies," she whispered. "It's keeping us here." Her reflection blinked, but she hadn't. The forest had her image now, trapped inside its rhythm. When she reached the edge of a ravine, the hum grew louder again, a pulse echoing up through the stone. Across the chasm she saw it, a faint golden light moving between the trees, rhythmic and slow. "Jonas." She shouted his name, and this time he turned. He looked the same, but something in his eyes had changed. An emptiness, like all his thoughts had been erased. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice hollow. "I waited, but the forest filled the waiting with years." His words trembled in the air like fragile glass. "Jonas, we can still leave," she cried, but he only smiled faintly, the kind of smile that belongs to someone remembering a life already gone. "It doesn't let go," he said softly. "It just forgets you slower." Then he stepped back, swallowed by fog. The ravine collapsed behind her as she turned away, its edges breaking apart like paper. She ran until the light faded again, until even fear became meaningless. At last, she found a single path through the trees. Straight, narrow, impossibly clear. At its end stood a figure holding her camera. As she drew closer, she saw it wasn't a stranger. It was her. Not older this time, identical. The double lifted the camera and whispered, "If anyone finds this..." Repeating the words Mara had spoken at the forest's edge, the loop was closing. The forest didn't consume its prey. It rewrote them, feeding on the repetition of their choices. Mara stepped forward, staring at herself, her voice trembling. "How long have I been walking?" The other Mara smiled gently. "Always." She awoke to sunlight. Real sunlight, warm and golden, not the brittle imitation the Vergewood made. For a moment she thought she had escaped. The air smelled of rain and earth, and birdsong trembled faintly through the canopy. But when she looked around, her heart stopped. The trees had formed a perfect circle around a clearing she didn't remember entering. At its center stood a wooden cabin, small, familiar. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. Mara approached slowly, camera raised though her hands shook. "Hello?" she called out. No answer. The door creaked open at her touch. Inside, dust floated in narrow beams of light. On a table near the window sat a second camera, identical to hers, and beside it, a notebook with her name written across the cover in her own handwriting. The notebook's pages were filled with drawings, circles of trees, spiral roots, sketches of faces half merged with bark. Each entry ended the same way: "Don't stay after the sun." Mara turned to the last page where her handwriting became frantic, looping over itself. A sentence repeated again and again. "The house is not a house." She heard movement behind her. Floorboards groaning. Slowly, she turned. Jonas stood in the doorway, or what looked like him. His skin was pale as wood grain, his eyes reflecting green light. "You made it," he said softly. For a heartbeat, Hope flared in her chest. Then she saw his feet, roots curling from his ankles, anchoring him to the threshold. "Mara," he whispered. "The forest built this place to remember us." Mara backed away as Jonas took a slow, creaking step forward, his voice both human and not. "Every hour it takes, it builds a memory to hold it," he murmured. "The house is made of us." The walls shuddered, groaning like timber in a storm. Beneath the floorboards came the rhythmic pulse she knew too well. She ran to the door, but the handle twisted under her grip, warm and wet like flesh. The windows sealed shut, the light dimming to amber. "You can't leave twice," Jonas said gently, his voice cracking like splitting wood. His eyes softened for a moment, the last of him still there. "But you can stop it from remembering more." He reached for her hand, bark spreading up his arm. "Burn it." Tears blurred her vision as she fumbled through her pack for a flare. The forest seemed to tremble with anticipation. "I can't," she whispered. Jonas' voice came faintly now, more wind than man. "If you don't, it will take more. Years, faces, everything." His eyes pleaded through the spreading bark. She struck the flare, its red light spilling across the cabin walls. For an instant, the place looked like the inside of a beating heart. The hum rose to a scream. Flames licked along the floorboards, catching fast, racing up the walls. Jonas smiled one last time, sad, grateful, and disappeared in the smoke. The sound of the forest became a single, deafening exhale. She burst through the cabin door as the roof caved in behind her, flames spilling into the clearing. The trees shuddered violently, their crowns bending inward as if recoiling from the fire. The hum broke apart into 1,000 smaller sounds, cries, whispers, echoes. Mara ran until her lungs burned, until the light behind her dimmed to smoke. When she finally stopped, the forest was silent again. She turned in slow disbelief. The clearing was gone. In its place stood only a wide circle of scorched soil. No cabin, no path. Only stillness. She sank to her knees, the camera trembling in her hand. On its screen, a message blinked where the recording counter should be. Exit found. Morning arrived soundlessly, pale and slow, filtering through trees that no longer felt alive. Mara walked without direction, her body hollowed by exhaustion, her thoughts echoing in time's thin air. The forest had changed again. Less a place now than an echo of one. The trunks were transparent, the ground reflective like water. Every step sent ripples through the world. Her reflection followed beneath her feet, out of sync by a fraction of a second. She whispered, "If I made it out, why can't I feel it?" The camera hung heavy around her neck, its screen black. She lifted it one last time and saw her reflection inside, staring back not with fear, but pity. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled. Or maybe it was the forest breathing again, preparing to start over. She followed a thread of light through the mist until it opened onto a meadow that shimmered like a mirage. The air here was warm, too still. In the center stood a wooden signpost, its letters half buried in soil. "Welcome to Vergewood Trailhead." Her breath caught. She turned in a full circle. The same sign she'd crossed days ago, the same pattern of trees. But older now, covered in vines thick as rope. Her camera flickered to life again without her touching it, screen glowing faint blue. The image it displayed wasn't her. It was footage of the first day. Her and Jonas stepping into the fog. A closed loop. "No," she whispered, voice cracking. "I broke it." The forest disagreed. Around her, the air shimmered, the light bending inward. She ran. Down the old trail, through paths she knew too well and not at all. But each step only brought her back to the same place. The trailhead, the meadow, the looping sun. Time here was no longer forward or back. It was hunger given shape. Her legs gave out and she dropped to her knees, gasping. The forest leaned close, whispering in 1,000 overlapping voices, none cruel, all tight. "You remember us," they said. "So, now we remember you." Mara raised her head, tears falling freely. "Then, remember this," she whispered, lifting the camera and turning it toward the sky. She pressed record, though there was no battery left, no film, only defiance. And light burst once more across the clearing. The light faded slowly this time, not with violence, but peace. The forest grew still. The hum quieted. Where Mara knelt, only her camera remained. Its casing cracked, its screen dark but warm. In the distance, the sound of birds returned, tentative and new. Seasons shifted in seconds, leaves budding, falling, snow melting. Time began again, but differently. And in that gentle renewal, the forest seemed lighter, relieved. Somewhere within its heart, where roots met stone, a single photograph appeared among the moss. Mara and Jonas, side by side at the edge of the trees, faces turned toward the unknown, smiling faintly, as if they'd always belonged there. And now, years later, though such a word meant nothing now, Ikers found the Vergewood again. The forest seemed ordinary, its paths calm, its air gentle. Yet some nights, when fog rose along the valley floor, people swore they heard a woman's voice carried on the wind. Sometimes, a faint red light flickered deep among the trees, like a camera recording something unseen. Locals warned newcomers never to stay past dusk, but curiosity never sleeps long. A new set of footprints would appear at the trailhead, small and deliberate, heading inward. The Vergewood no longer devoured time. It shared it, offering pieces of those it once kept. And somewhere in that quiet hum beneath the roots, the forest whispered one last word, soft and grateful. Remember.